Let me briefly add, as we said earlier, I think the President mentioned that as well, that we have a brain drain right now, in principle, because young families move away to Ireland because they want to evade the lockdown regime under the old government. Maybe things will turn around if we could find the exit from this situation. As the first European country, we might become very attractive because people wouldn't have these limitations here. But also, if we think about how can a humane environment be created here, it could become very attractive for people who have a certain, how can I put it, say, have not only an intellectual training, but also some heart training, if you can say, if you can put it this way, and want to allow their children to grow up and thrive in such a constellation. So I see, from a social policy point of view, I see good opportunities for Germany.
Most of the time we spend at our workplace, most of our lifetime, and so here I think this has a special importance to it. So it's not competition, but cooperative thinking that should play a role here. There's lots of positive examples already available that people are very engaged. Many companies see a sense in what they do, and are, of course, the point that many of the staff in companies who do not provide sense. I mean, Professor Bergholz, you've just said we have to move away from this fierce competition towards cooperation. I cannot really assess this at the moment, but I think that's going to have benefits only.
I have been thinking about democracy for 70 years since I went to school. How is democracy possible? How can we stop it from slipping into dictatorship? That train of thought was triggered by my teacher of German, who asked this question again and again. My approach deals with the question of moral competence. That is a word that hasn't been mentioned. As a professor of teaching at the University of Constance, I was able to analyze this in detail, developing a new test that makes morality or moral competence visible without requiring dubious statistics. The results known to me that I have available agree with what Mr. Ruppert said earlier. All people have a moral setup. They want to be good. They agree with the principles of democracy, freedom, justice, cooperation, and truthfulness as well. For democracy, a minimum of moral competence is required, and this competence needs to be trained like a muscle. So in order for it to grow, it must have a punching partner, as it were. And if it isn't offered that, then it will not grow or even atrophy. And I have publicized before about how moral competence in Germany and in other countries are doing. And I'm actually surprised that the democracy is still around, because we found that moral competence, the necessary moral competence, is not in place with a large part of the population. So our competence, our social competence our moral competence is dependent on abilities to exercise like our muscles. And if we ask students, they often tell us that they have no opportunity nearly at all to think for themselves, to discuss and to develop these higher abilities. Well, I think we have taken a look at the core aspects of moral competence already. So the way how you train it, the ability to ask questions rather than take commands, then the ability to discuss with people of different opinions rather than fighting them. I.e., Everything may be said, really anything may be said, but you must not value or judge people. And this simple rule is really a miracle cue. We had a workshop recently, and all participants were suddenly surprised how well you can discuss very tricky issues without people going for each other's throat. And in over 20 years that I've been practicing this, I never had to intervene because people, when they adhere to that, they realize that it's a great rule. Geared my presentation to that. I can compress it a bit because I've written a good book that you can use to read up on it, but maybe I can give you one result that I've shown before. To the 20 to 50% who reject, those are the more interesting people for us. We never look at those. They do not execute those orders. And Mackaman never wanted to know that because he didn't believe in the power of moralcy. He excluded the possibility of moralcy playing a role. You have to ask yourselves, how come the strength, the rejection of such orders? All of us here in this room have not subjected ourselves to these orders. That was very impressive to see. People with a low moral competency, only 13% of those refused to execute the order. Those who have a high moral competency, 75% rejected the order. This is not only a little bit, it's a huge difference. What we have just experienced now, could that have been prevented if there had been more moral competency within the population? Does that mean that if 75% of the population had moral competency? Not quite. If all had a minimum of moral competency, 20%, that's not so much, 20 points, then everybody would say no, or nearly all. And this is a crass failure of our educational system. Von Humboldt introduced it as a obligatory system to keep society as a democracy together. Now we still have the obligation, but not the education anymore that we need. So people are not being prepared for democracy. So people's ability to discuss, to reason for themselves is not being promoted. By the contrary, it is actually preventing it and contributes to our current problems. And it presupposes one thing, of course, better training of teachers. They have to know how to promote moral competency. Teachers must accept that children can think for themselves and reason. And it's not a question that depends on people's willingness. It's just a question of their ability. If we don't have that ability, then we won't have democracy. Schumpeter knew this. Anybody who knows what's the right thing to do doesn't have a choice. They have to do the right thing. So what we can do, the upper limit determines what we do. If you can't act good, act well, then they won't, of course.
Urgent advice. If we repeat the words corona pandemic without intent, we enforce panic in the population, because they think if we say it all the time, it exists, and we are not aware of that. Everything that we talk about all the time exists. Philosophy tells us realism. That means every word corresponds to reality.
What's important is that vis-a-vis this large group, we need to find a simple language, short sentences, no foreign terms, no subordinate clauses. If we have long sentences, a lot of subordinate clauses, then we exclude a lot of people from this discourse. So the language that we academics have acquired is a huge barrier for a large part of the population that we will never be able to reach. Just let's do it. Let's leave these meta sentences out. We can gain some time, and we shouldn't use it for additional talking. We need to give people time to let it sink in. Every new piece of information needs 3 seconds, so every new piece of surprising information that a person receives requires 3 seconds to allow it to sink in, to network it in the brain, and to understand it.
And then an emotional speech is important, and not using abstract talk. Personal experiences are a good help here. Since March, I have had so many personal experiences that I have no luck. 2 of my brothers died, one by being arrested in his home, in his care home. The other one died of cancer because he wasn't admitted to hospital. Simple language. That's quick to learn. That's an effort everyone can make, but if we get more than that percentage of people, that's the mean. Simply to speak in a way that people can understand and know what we're talking about.
And we have to say, if the cultural industry is basically in tatters, a few things have started. I see that 𝗵𝗺𝗀𝗺𝗃𝗍 has started working again, the theater. They can have 50% of their audience back in again. So if that wasn't possible, then that would have been ruinous for them. Well, will there be a mass insolvencies of cultural institutions, or what do you think?
It's not going to happen. It has happened. I know small theaters in Germany who are not going to open again. And I know some artists who are not going to be active as artists anymore. They are bus drivers now or work on the markets, which is nothing bad, but art lives off the stage. And the orchestras that didn't rehearse should now provide the same quality than before the crisis. That's not going to be easy.
I'm really surprised to see that many artists never understood, apparently, that this is the basis of their existence, that everything will go back to normalcy after 18 months. How do you explain that?
Probably it's fear of existence. We have seen that people who officially came forward to speak against that, they were repressed. There were searched homes, and they were not invited by the theaters anymore. I know of a colleague who was planned to be in a theater in October 2020. He did a critical comment on the Corona narrative, and he was disinvited. He was cancelled. So colleagues who have won an award of 10,000 euros had it taken away because they were on Monday demonstrations and things like that. And that's not individual cases. It's just not published in the media. So taking us back to the media, they're a central point. Many people in the population may think that the artists are supported by the state. This is not the case. There were some aids, but that was to an amount where many people wouldn't even pay their rent from. To present the results here, we've asked whether the responsible people for the crisis should be made responsible. 89% say yes, 2% say no. And the other thing is, do you think the crisis is a chance for a better world? 74% say yes, and 25% say no. It's a little bit of a rounding figure here that we have here. Affect children. Children are affected by the crisis. Many may not well be aware of it because they just followed along what the parents do and did and had to do with the regime of the old government. That children are taken away from the pleasures of normal life. like going to school and starting the school as a ceremony without the parents. End of school celebrations were cancelled, no sports activities, so lots and lots of restrictions, of course, who had an effect. That had an effect on our children. I'd like to come back to history. I used to be a family judge, looking at quarreling parents with children in the middle of them who were in loyalty contracts and very unhappy. And I could throw all my files in court away. The children were making very clear that they were suffering, but they would like to have both parents and stay in contact with both parents. They loved both parents. When I saw that, I wondered what I was there for. Was I there for to implement dictations that I got from the top, or should I protect children? And if I have to decide, I would get an expertise on you, whether you are not ready to make peace and attend your children for egoistic reason, or if you are restricted for medical reasons. In that case, I would have to take a decision. But before I have that exam, I'm not going to do anything. But you have opportunity to get rid of me by now getting a consultant, and I'll give you 3 months' time, for example, and then I will come and see what the parents have made of it. And if you couldn't get to peace, then the person who is the egoist insisting on their right is going to have a bad time, because that's punishable. However, I never had to go that far. When I looked at the adolescents in front of jail, in front of the court, they weren't there because they were bad, but they had broken homes that they had to live in. They had to find their own solutions. Because they couldn't be educated, because they were just torn apart by the fighting parents. So as a judge, I saw there's the wrong people on the accusation bench here. We have assessed that we are in a situation where, let me call it that, all of us adults have moved to a child's position. So from the fear which arose here, for whatever reason, we are behaving like children who can't do other than what the authorities up there want them to do. Otherwise, they will be in the risk of losing the social context. In schools that work in splitting up the groups, and it's not about developing competency, but evaluating everything the children do and giving the children the impression that they're not good enough, they're not value enough, and they have to look up.
The big problem with the educational system being involved in the international agenda, we have moved to a function-optimized education. We have induced a lot of function, but nobody really knows what this has, what meaning this has anymore. So the Corona measures allow for survival, but nobody knows what to survive for anymore. And so we need to reinforce on meaning again. Confrontation with creativity, with science, with art, with the arts can make this possible if we extend it by a function beyond a functional perspective to an aesthetic perspective, to a humanistic, sense-oriented perspective. So we need to adjust the educational system in terms of the institutional character of the schools. The training of the teachers, the curricula need to be reformed in the sense of the objectives suggested by Professor Desmet, which had been in our educational systems but have been forgotten because we moved into the technocratic line of thought developed in the Anglo-Saxon area. But we're working on it.
Juridical people, we have not learned, we are not prepared and trained to look at the emotional, human side, the competency, conflict salvations. We're not prophets. So that means we learn to look in the back, in the past, and find causes and finalize conflicts by making a decision. That's our job. But we did not learn to look into the future and program future development and open them up for children tomorrow and the day after tomorrow become free of whatever conflicts they may face. That is something we cannot do. It doesn't mean to attack the judge and tell them how stupid they are, but I have to introduce a catalyst into the system to do things. First, that the need of the child, of these parents, or whoever is involved, the needs have to be psychologically assessed and checked for the best options for a good, healthy future development on the one hand, and on the other hand, explain this to the judge in such a way that they have to follow it and then defend everything that affects these competencies in a wrong way. So that means we need to have interdisciplinary experts for child jurisdiction that is available to anybody, free of charge, at any time, as soon as somebody is affected in their rights. These models are available, and this is why I'm happy that you have invited me. I'd like to put this more concrete in from the perspective of my ministry. Of course, this is necessary, but there is a high need to action in the families. I think we have to stop with the actions immediately, come back to normal presence at school. All schools have to be reviewed with the new areas of the 𝗚𝗃𝗁. So I'd like to invite you to talk to the staff in my ministry so that we can develop everything that we have heard about. We have immediate need for action rather today than tomorrow. Thank you.
Not only the children, but also old people who have been suffering these same terrible measures. They need to get support so that they can heal fast and that we can clarify things here.
I said it's not punishable. If you want to wear masks, somebody who wants to do so can, but children and elderly are protected of being forced to do that, saying that here we have a law that makes this punishable.
Well, from my point of view, even today, there could be a substantial change with immediate effect if the parents' representation groups be given some support by giving them legal protection, which is possible with immediate effect today. Financing this, the MPs need to be informed about this. It's not a question of saying clearly what might be happening. What we need to determine is what is actually happening. What are the potential dangers? The executive, i.e., the authorities, the heads of the authorities have issued orders that if somebody enters the authority, the premises, has to wear a mask, and if I as a judge go in there with a mask, I am already biased. So, if we're dealing with children now, with the rights of children now, can be approached differently, not by the lawyer, but by the expert accompanying the lawyer. He will speak directly to the judge in an emotional way, and also addressing these issues. The fact that we have a constitutional infringement at the expense of children right now, there is no court of justice that is competent in this context. unless it's the family court. And if they reject such cases, then we have no court.
And why do they reject it? Because immediately, if they did their job, they have to expect their homes to be searched and their computers and phones to be confiscated.
In the first place, I refuse to be impressed. Mr. Detmer in Weimar continues to be to refuse to be impressed by that. And there are many judges who have been exonerated here. So I have to say that we have sufficient colleagues, 20%, to get back to this.
Maybe you're right.